There are few figures in Russian history as controversial and colorful as Marshal Andrey Ivanovich Yeremenko. A man with a fiery temperament, he was one of the architects of the great victory. A commander whose decisiveness saved armies at critical moments, but whose impulsiveness sometimes led to heavy losses. A military leader who rose from the son of a peasant to the conqueror of Königsberg. His character was forged in the crucible of revolutions and wars, where every decision could change the course of history. Today, we will tell you about a man who proved that a true military leader wins not only with his mind, but also with his heart. The story of a marshal whose temperament became his main weapon in the fight against the most terrible enemy in human history. Friends, the story of Marshal Yeremenko shows how a person's character can influence the fate of millions. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about the heroes who changed the world. And in the comments, share your opinion. Does a military leader's emotionality always harm the cause? Or does it sometimes become the key to victory? In the village of Markovka, in the Luhansk province, where the wind blew across the endless steppes, a boy was born in 1892 who was destined to become one of the most prominent commanders of the Great Patriotic War. Andrey Ivanovich Yeremenko was born into a simple peasant family, where calluses were valued more than any regalia, and character was tempered in the daily struggle for survival. The future marshal's father, Ivan Yeremenko, was a harsh but fair man. He realized early on that his son was not cut out for a measured peasant life. The boy was distinguished by his incredible energy, which literally burst forth. While other children played quietly in the yard, Andrey organized entire military campaigns, dividing the kids into armies and staging battles with such passion that it seemed as if the fate of the whole world depended on the outcome of their children's games. His mother, Paraskeva Yeremenko, often shook her head as she watched her son. "He's growing up too hot-headed," she would say to her neighbors. And she was right. Andrey couldn't do anything half-heartedly. If he studied, he gave it his all. If he worked in the fields, he worked until he was exhausted. If he argued until he was hoarse. This character trait, which many considered a flaw, would later become his greatest strength on the battlefield. His childhood in the Ukrainian steppe taught the boy a lot. It was here that he first felt what it meant to be responsible for others. When, at the age of 9, his father entrusted him with herding the family's flock of sheep, Andrey took it as a real combat mission. Not a single sheep was lost under his watch, and not a single wolf dared to approach the flock. The boy spent days and nights in the steppe, studying the habits of animals, the features of the terrain, learning to read the weather by the clouds and the behavior of birds. His school years only reinforced the natural talents of the future commander. Teachers noted his phenomenal memory and ability to quickly grasp the essence of any issue. But most importantly, Andrey never remained indifferent to injustice. If he saw older children bullying younger ones, he immediately intervened without thinking about the consequences. This impulsiveness often led to trouble, but his classmates knew that if something happened, Yeremenko would not betray them. At the age of 14, an event occurred that finally defined the character of the teenager. News of the Japanese war reached the village. Adult men gathered in the evenings to discuss distant battles, and Andrey eagerly absorbed every word. It was then that the idea first took shape in his mind. A real man must serve his country. It doesn't matter if you are a peasant or a nobleman. If your homeland is in danger, your place is on the front line. The First World War caught Yeremenko at the age of 22. By that time, he was already a prominent conscript, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing eyes that revealed an indomitable will. The military registration and enlistment office sent him to an infantry regiment, where the recruit immediately attracted the attention of the officers. Less than a month later, he was promoted to corporal, and 2 months later to junior non-commissioned officer. His comrades quickly realized that Yeremenko was not one to sit around. He couldn't sit quietly in the trenches when there was fighting going on nearby. If the command planned a reconnaissance in force, Andrey was the first to submit a report requesting to be included in the group. His determination and willingness to risk his own life for his comrades quickly turned a simple peasant boy into the informal leader of the company. But what was most surprising was that, despite all his ardor, Yeremenko never lost his head in critical situations. On the contrary, the more dangerous the situation became, the cooler and more calculating the young non-commissioned officer acted. This paradoxical character trait, the ability to maintain clarity of thought in moments of extreme emotional tension, would later become his trademark as a commander. Could this fiery temperament really become his main weapon in future battles that would determine the fate of an entire country? The positional warfare on the Eastern Front became a real school of military art for Yeremenko. Unlike many of his comrades, who were bored by the monotony of trench life, Andrey used every free minute to study tactics. He closely observed the actions of Austrian and German units, analyzed their strengths and weaknesses, and memorized how the enemy conducted reconnaissance and organized their defenses. The winter of 1914-1915 was particularly harsh. In the trenches near Przemysl, Russian troops fought protracted battles with the Austro-Hungarian army. It was here that Yeremenko first demonstrated the qualities that would later make him an outstanding military leader. When communication between companies was disrupted during another enemy attack, Andrey, without waiting for orders, organized a group of volunteers and restored command under fire. Colonel Alexander Mikhailovich Denikin, then still a regimental commander, personally recommended Yeremenko for an award. This non-commissioned officer, he wrote in his recommendation, possesses a rare combination of personal bravery and tactical acumen. At a critical moment, he was able to take responsibility and save the situation for an entire battalion. The St. George Cross, 4th class, was the future Marshal's first combat award. But the real test for Yeremenko came with the Brusilov offensive of 1916. By that time, he had already been promoted to second lieutenant and appointed company commander. For a peasant's son, this was an incredible achievement. Officers' epaulets in the Tsarist army were extremely rare for commoners. Andrey understood this and tried to justify the trust of the command. On June 4, 1916, the offensive of General Alexei Brusilov's army began. Yeremenko's company was part of the strike force that was to break through the Austrian defenses in the area near the village of Lutsk. The young officer spent the entire night before the attack with his soldiers, checking their equipment, explaining their tasks, and encouraging those who were going into real combat for the first time. In the morning, when the artillery preparation reached its peak, Yeremenko was the first to rise from the trench. "For Russia! For the Tsar!" His cry spread across the entire line of attack. The company rushed forward, carried away by the energy of their commander. The Austrians met the attackers with heavy fire, but it was already impossible to stop the Russian avalanche. The first line of defense fell after 20 minutes. The second held out for another half hour. In this battle, Yeremenko's tactical talent was fully revealed. When the attack began to falter under machine gun fire, he quickly assessed the situation and made an unconventional decision. Instead of a frontal assault, which would have cost dozens of lives, Andrey organized a flanking maneuver. He led half of the company in a frontal attack, distracting the enemy's attention, while the rest of the soldiers secretly bypassed the fortification from the flank. The maneuver was a brilliant success. The machine gun nest was taken with minimal losses, and the road to Lutsk was opened. For this battle, Yeremenko received the Order of St. Anne, 4th class, and early promotion to 2nd lieutenant. But most importantly, he understood the most important principle of military art. It is not the stronger who wins, but the smarter. The revolutionary events of 1917 found Yeremenko in the hospital, where he was being treated for a severe concussion sustained during the last offensive. The news from Petrograd shocked the young officer. The Tsar's abdication, the collapse of the army, fraternization with the enemy, it all seemed unbelievable. A man who had served for faith, Tsar, and fatherland his entire adult life suddenly found himself without two of his three pillars. The choice that Yeremenko had to make in the spring of 1917 determined his entire future. Many frontline officers went home, unwilling to serve the provisional government. Others joined the White Movement. Andrey, however, made a decision that many perceived as a betrayal of officers' honor. He remained in the army and recognized the new government. This choice was dictated not by career considerations, but by a deep understanding of the situation. Yeremenko saw that the country was on the brink of disaster and believed that it was the duty of every honest person to prevent its final collapse. "The motherland is greater than any government," he said to his comrades, who reproached him for betraying his oath. The events of October 1917 finally divided the officer corps. For Yeremenko, this was the moment of truth. He could have followed the example of many of his colleagues and gone to the Don to join General Kornilov, or he could have tried to lose himself in the revolutionary turmoil by changing his name and biography. But what path would a man of such character choose when the fate of his fatherland was at stake? The Civil War became a period of final formation for Yeremenko as a military leader. In February 1918, he joined the Red Army with the rank of company commander. The decision was not easy. Many of his fellow soldiers perceived it as betrayal, but Andrey was convinced that only the new government was capable of preserving the unity of the country and stopping foreign intervention. The first months of service in the Red Army showed how difficult it would be for career officers to adapt to the new realities. Revolutionary discipline was radically different from the army rules of the old regime. Soldiers elected their commanders, discussed orders, and demanded explanations for every decision. Many officers could not stand such democracy and either deserted or defected to the Whites. Yeremenko found his own approach to the new army. He understood the main thing. The Red Army soldiers were ready to follow their commander, but only one who had earned their respect by personal example. Andrey never demanded from his subordinates what he could not do himself. If it was necessary to force a river under enemy fire, he was the first to enter the water. If reconnaissance was needed, He personally led the group. This style of command quickly bore fruit. In the summer of 1918, Yeremenko's regiment took part in battles against the Czechoslovak Corps on the Volga. It was here that his talent as a crisis manager was first fully revealed. When the Czechs cut the railway and surrounded the Red Army units at the Syzran station, the situation seemed hopeless. Ammunition was running out, food was running low, and the enemy outnumbered them 3-1. In such a situation, many commanders would have preferred to retreat or even surrender. Yeremenko made a different decision. Gathering the company commanders, he outlined a plan to break through, which at first glance seemed suicidal. Instead of trying to break through to his own lines by the shortest route, Andrey proposed striking in the opposite direction, where the Czechs least expected an attack. "Comrades," he said to the Red Army soldiers before the battle, "the enemy thinks we've fallen into a trap. But they've forgotten one thing. Mice sometimes bite cats." These words became famous among the regiment's soldiers. The night attack was a complete success. The Czechs, who did not expect an attack from this direction, were unable to organize resistance. By morning, Yeremenko's regiment had not only broken out of the encirclement, but also captured the enemy's supply train with valuable military equipment. For this battle, Andrey received the Order of the Red Banner and was promoted to brigade commander, but most importantly, he finally gained authority among the Red Army soldiers. Now he was known as the Fiery Brigade Commander, emphasizing his ability to make quick decisions in the most difficult situations. In the fall of 1918, Yeremenko's brigade was transferred to the Eastern Front, where fierce battles with Admiral Alexander Vasilyevich Kolchak's army unfolded. Here, Andrey encountered a completely new type of enemy. While the Czechoslovak Corps fought with discipline but without much enthusiasm, the White Guards fought with the desperation of the doomed, knowing that defeat would mean complete catastrophe for them. The winter campaign of 1918-1919 was a turning point in Yeremenko's career. During the offensive on Ufa, his brigade found itself in a very difficult situation. Intelligence had spotted a large concentration of enemy forces, and the Red Army units were in danger of being crushed. The front command ordered a retreat, but Yeremenko made a decision that many considered insane. Instead of retreating, he ordered the brigade to dig in and engage in defensive combat. "Nothing ventured, nothing gained," he said to the chief of staff, who was trying to dissuade the commander. Andrey's calculation proved to be correct. The Whites, who were expecting an easy victory over the retreating enemy, encountered organized defenses and suffered heavy losses. And the reserves that arrived 2 days later allowed them to launch a counter-offensive. This episode revealed another important trait of Yeremenko's character: his ability to take responsibility, even when it went against the orders of his superiors. Formally, he violated the order to retreat, but the result justified the risk. The White Guard division was defeated, and the road to Ufa was open. By the end of the Civil War, Yeremenko was already commanding a rifle division. His subordinates were accustomed to rapid maneuvers, unexpected decisions, and inevitable victory. "It's impossible to lose with the fiery division commander," said the Red Army soldiers. Indeed, Yeremenko's division never suffered a serious defeat. But what lessons would this temperamental commander learn from the fratricidal war, and how would they help him in the coming trials when the very existence of the state would be at stake? Peacetime proved to be an even more difficult test for a man with Yeremenko's temperament than the years of war. The 1920s were a period of radical reorganization of the Red Army, and many Civil War commanders were unable to adapt to the new requirements. Military leaders were now required not only to be brave and decisive, but also to have deep theoretical knowledge, the ability to work with modern technology, and an understanding of the principles of mass operations. Andrey Ivanovich understood that in order to keep up with the demands of the times, he needed to radically rethink his approach to military affairs. In 1921, he enrolled in advanced training courses for command personnel, and then entered the Mikhail Vasilyevich Frunze Military Academy. For a man accustomed to practical activity, the years of study became a real test of patience. Academic lecture halls did not suit Yeremenko's explosive temperament. Teachers often complained about his excessive emotionality during seminars. Andrey Ivanovich could not calmly listen to theoretical explanations that, in his opinion, contradicted his combat experience. He would jump up from his seat and start arguing passionately, citing examples from recent battles. But it was precisely this willingness to defend his point of view, even if it ran counter to official doctrine, that made Yeremenko one of the most notable students at the academy. His thesis, "The Use of Artillery in Maneuver Operations," was highly praised by such luminaries of military science as Mikhail Nikolaevich Tukhachevsky and Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov. The work clearly reflected the author's characteristic approach: maximum concentration of firepower in the direction of the main strike. After graduating from the academy in 1925, Yeremenko was appointed Chief of Staff of a rifle division. For an ambitious commander, this was a disappointment. He had hoped for a higher position. But his character did not allow Andrey Ivanovich to dwell on his regrets for long. He decided to make his division exemplary in every respect. Service in peacetime revealed another important trait of Yeremenko's personality: his ability to work diligently with people. While in battle, his soldiers followed their commander, inspired by his energy. Now he had to earn their respect through daily work. Andrey Ivanovich knew every officer in the division personally, remembered the family circumstances of his subordinates, and was always ready to help solve everyday problems. Yeremenko paid particular attention to combat training. He was convinced that the future war would be radically different from all previous conflicts. The widespread use of aircraft, tanks, and artillery would require commanders to have completely new skills. During exercises, Yeremenko's division practiced the interaction of various branches of the military, practiced speed marches, and improved its communication system. Colleagues often criticized Andrey Ivanovich for being too demanding. Indeed, the exercises in his division were conducted in conditions that were as close as possible to combat. Officers and soldiers worked to the limit of their physical capabilities, but the results were not long in coming. In district maneuvers, Yeremenko's division consistently took first place, and the experience of its combat training was studied in other units. The 1930s brought Yeremenko his long-awaited promotion. In 1931, he was appointed commander of a rifle corps, and 3 years later, he headed a large military formation, an army. These were years of intensive modernization of the Red Army, and Andrey Ivanovich found himself at the center of the processes taking place. The new commander paid particular attention to studying the experience of the Civil War in Spain. The events on the Iberian Peninsula clearly showed what the future war would be like. The massive use of aviation, tank breakthroughs, artillery duels. All this required a revision of established tactical principles. Yeremenko was one of the first to understand that victory would go to those who could ensure effective interaction between all branches of the military. In 1937, mass repressions began in the Red Army. Many talented commanders were arrested and shot on charges of military conspiracy. Yeremenko miraculously escaped this fate, although his candidacy was considered potentially dangerous by the NKVD. He was saved by his reputation as a commander from the plow, a man of simple origins, far removed from political intrigue. The tragedy of 1937 had a painful effect on Andrey Ivanovich's character. He became more cautious in his statements and stopped openly criticizing the shortcomings in the organization of the army. But internally, Yeremenko understood that the country had lost its best military personnel on the eve of a major war. And when it began, it would be commanders like him who would have to pay for the mistakes of the political leadership. By the beginning of 1940, Lieutenant General Yeremenko commanded one of the best armies of the Red Army. His subordinates were better prepared for modern warfare than many other units. But would this preparedness be enough when the military machine of Nazi Germany descended upon the USSR? At 4 o'clock in the morning on June 22, 1941, a phone call from Moscow woke Lieutenant General Yeremenko in his apartment in Minsk. The voice of Chief of the General Staff, General Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov, sounded tense. Andrey Ivanovich, the Germans have launched an offensive across the entire front. Your army is in the direction of the main strike. Act according to the cover plan. The cover plan. Yeremenko knew this document well, but no one could have imagined that the real war would be so radically different from the theoretical calculations. German troops were striking with unprecedented force. The enemy's air force dominated the skies, and tank wedges broke through the defenses where they seemed to be particularly strong. By noon, it became clear that the first echelon of Soviet troops was not simply retreating. It had been crushed. Contact with the divisions was lost, one after another. Army headquarters received conflicting reports of enemy breakthroughs, encirclements, and massive losses of equipment and personnel. In such circumstances, many commanders lost control of the situation, but it was precisely at critical moments that Yeremenko's character came to the fore. "Comrades," he said to the staff officers gathered in the underground bunker, "the war has not started as we planned. But that does not mean we should panic. Our task is to buy time, to give the country the opportunity to mobilize all its forces." There was not a shadow of doubt in the general's voice, although everyone in the room understood the catastrophic nature of the situation. The first days of the war revealed the complexity of the Red Army's situation. The suddenness of the attack, the enemy's technical superiority, and the loss of control over the troops all created an almost hopeless situation. But Yeremenko would not have been himself if he had given up in the face of adversity. He began to do what he did best: improvise in a critical situation. When it became clear that it was impossible to hold the pre-planned lines, Andrey Ivanovich decided to switch to a maneuverable defense. Instead of trying to stop the German tanks at fixed positions, he ordered a retreat, inflicting maximum damage on the enemy. "Let the Germans advance," he told his commanders, "but every kilometer must cost them blood." This tactic required iron discipline and high morale from his subordinates. Retreating without turning the retreat into a flight, fighting while surrounded without losing faith in victory. All this was possible only on the condition of the soldiers' absolute trust in their commander. And Yeremenko managed to win this trust in the very first days of the war. On June 26th, an episode occurred that became legendary among the general's subordinates. German tanks broke through to the army headquarters and threatened to capture it. The officers suggested evacuating, but Yeremenko flatly refused. "The army commander retreats last," he declared, and personally led the defense of the headquarters. The battle lasted 4 hours. The lieutenant general, with a machine gun in his hands, fought off the German tankers, setting an example for the entire headquarters. When reinforcements arrived and the German troops were repelled, Andrey Ivanovich calmly returned to the map and continued to direct operations. "Now that's a real commander," said the soldiers, and this story instantly spread throughout all parts of the army. But heroic episodes could not change the overall course of events. By the end of June, Yeremenko's army had lost most of its equipment and was forced to retreat 200 kilometers from its original positions. Personnel losses amounted to more than 50% of the original strength. By all formal indicators, it was a disaster. But Andrey Ivanovich managed to preserve the most important thing: the fighting spirit of the troops. In early July, a meeting was held at the Supreme Command headquarters to analyze the reasons for the failures of the first days of the war. Many commanders tried to justify themselves by objective circumstances, citing the suddenness of the attack and the enemy's superiority in equipment. Yeremenko took a fundamentally different position. "Comrades," he said, addressing the country's leadership, "we must honestly admit that we were not ready for such a war. But that does not mean that we are doomed to defeat. Our enemy has weaknesses, and our task is to find them and exploit them." This frankness made a strong impression on Stalin, who listened attentively to the general's report. It was after this meeting that Yeremenko received a new appointment as commander of the Western Front. He was given a task that many considered impossible: to stop the German advance on Moscow and prepare the conditions for a counteroffensive. "Can you stop the Germans?" Stalin asked during a personal meeting. "Comrade Stalin," Yeremenko replied, "I will stop them. But to do so, I need reserves and complete freedom of action." The Supreme Commander looked closely at the general and nodded. "You will receive reserves, and you have always had freedom of action. But would the energy and determination of one man be enough to turn the tide in a direction where the fate of the capital was being decided?" The Battle of Smolensk was the first serious test for Yeremenko as front commander. With the remnants of several defeated armies and newly deployed reserves at his disposal, he had to solve a task that at first glance seemed impossible: to stop Field Marshal Fyodor von Bock's Army Group Center on the approaches to Moscow. The situation was complicated by the fact that German troops had already crossed the Dnieper and captured bridgeheads on the eastern bank of the river. The tank groups of generals Heinz Guderian and Hermann Gort continued their rapid advance, threatening to encircle large Red Army forces. At the front headquarters, many officers spoke openly about the hopelessness of the situation. Yeremenko thought differently. After studying intelligence data and analyzing the nature of the enemy's actions, he came to the conclusion that the Germans had overestimated their capabilities. Their communications stretched for hundreds of kilometers, the flanks of their tank wedges were insufficiently covered, and the pace of the offensive did not allow them to establish a solid defense on the captured lines. "Comrades," he said at a meeting of commanders, "the enemy is strong, but not omnipotent. Its main strength lies in the speed of its offensive. Let's deprive him of this advantage, force him to fight by our rules, and you will see that the German war machine will fail." Many considered these words to be overly optimistic, but the events of the coming days proved the commander right. On August 1st, an operation began that would later be called the Smolensk Cauldron. Yeremenko made a decision that ran counter to the High Command's instructions to hold the occupied lines at all costs. Instead of a rigid defense, he organized a series of counterattacks on the flanks of the German groups, seeking to disrupt their coordination and force them to switch to defense. Aviation played a particularly important role in the commander's plans. Despite the huge losses of the first days of the war, the Soviet Air Force still retained a certain potential. Yeremenko personally met with the commanders of the air regiments and set them the task to disrupt the supply of German tank groups at any cost. "Pilots," he addressed the assembled pilots, "the success of the entire operation depends on you. German tanks are strong as long as they have fuel and ammunition. Deprive them of supplies, and these steel monsters will turn into a pile of scrap metal." These words became the motto of the Soviet Air Force in the Battle of Smolensk. The results were not long in coming. After just 3 days of intense fighting, the pace of the German offensive slowed dramatically. Guderian's tank divisions, which had seemed invincible until recently, were forced to switch to defense. For the first time since the beginning of the war, the German command faced organized resistance that could not be broken by standard blitzkrieg methods. But the main events unfolded near the town of Yelnya. Here, German troops had created a powerful fortified area, which was to become a springboard for a subsequent offensive on Moscow. Eliminating the Yelnya salient became a matter of principle for Yeremenko. He understood that the first major victory over the Wehrmacht would have enormous moral significance for the entire army. The operation was prepared with exceptional care. Andrey Ivanovich personally visited all the areas of the upcoming offensive and met with the commanders of regiments and battalions. He paid particular attention to artillery preparation. "Artillery is the god of war," said the commander, "and this god must be on our side." The concentration of firepower on the Yelninsky direction was unprecedented for that period of the war. On August 30th, 1941, the offensive on the Yelninsky salient began. The artillery preparation lasted 2 hours, turning the German positions into a lunar landscape. Then, the infantry went on the attack. Yeremenko personally observed the course of the battle from the forward command post, located just 2 kilometers from the front line. "General, it's too dangerous," warned the chief of staff. "Soldiers must see their commander," replied Andrey Ivanovich, without taking his eyes off his binoculars. And indeed, the news that the fiery one himself was watching the battle instantly spread through the ranks of the attackers. The soldiers attacked with redoubled energy. The battles for Yelnya lasted 5 days. The Germans resisted desperately, understanding the strategic importance of this line. Several times, the outcome of the operation hung in the balance when German counterattacks threatened to break through the Soviet defenses. At such moments, Yeremenko's main quality as a military leader was fully revealed: his ability to make instant decisions in critical situations. When German tanks broke through the rear of one of the divisions and there was a threat of encirclement, most commanders suggested withdrawing the troops to pre-prepared positions. Yeremenko made a different decision. "We will fight where we stand. The reserves will arrive. The main thing is to hold out." He personally went to the area of the breakthrough and organized the defense with all available forces: rear units, artillerymen, and signalmen. On September 6th, Yelnya was liberated. This was the first major offensive operation of the Red Army that ended in complete success. Moreover, during the fighting, several elite divisions of the Wehrmacht, considered invincible, were defeated. The moral significance of this victory cannot be overestimated. The Soviet troops proved to themselves and the whole world that the Germans could be defeated. Stalin personally congratulated Yeremenko on the victory. "You have shown, Comrade Yeremenko, that with the right leadership, our troops are capable not only of defending themselves, but also of attacking." Andrey Ivanovich was awarded the Order of Lenin and received the extraordinary military rank of Colonel General. But the Battle of Smolensk also revealed another side to the commander's character. After the victory at Yelnya, many expected Yeremenko to rest on his laurels and allow his troops to rest. However, the general had other ideas. "The enemy is weakened," he declared at the front's military council, "and we must build on our success." He proposed an immediate general offensive in the western direction. This proposal sparked debate at headquarters. Many believed that the front's forces were exhausted and that a pause was needed to restore the troops' combat readiness. But Yeremenko insisted, "War is not chess, where you can calmly think through every move. In war, the winner is the one who acts faster than the enemy." In the end, a compromise was reached, a limited offensive with the aim of improving positions. The results of the operation were mixed. On the one hand, Soviet troops advanced 20 to 30 kilometers and occupied more advantageous positions. On the other hand, the losses were quite high, and the strategic goal of defeating Army Group Center was not achieved. Critics later reproached Yeremenko for excessive zeal and for not always correctly assessing the capabilities of his troops. Perhaps there was some truth in this, but it was precisely this willingness to take risks, to take calculated risks in order to achieve victory, that distinguished Andrey Ivanovich from many other military leaders. The Battle of Smolensk was an important stage in Yeremenko's development as a commander. Here, for the first time, he proved himself not only as a tactician capable of winning a single battle, but also as a strategist who understood the overall logic of a military campaign. The experience gained at Smolensk would prove invaluable in the battles to come. But even more serious trials awaited the commander, and the question was whether he would be able to learn the right lessons from the first months of the war. October 1941 brought Yeremenko one of the most painful defeats of his military career. Operation Typhoon, the German offensive on Moscow, took the Soviet troops by surprise with its power and speed. In a matter of days, the enemy broke through the front in several places, surrounding large Red Army forces near Vyazma and Bryansk. The Bryansk front, commanded by Yeremenko, found itself in a particularly difficult position. General Guderian's tank group struck precisely in his area of responsibility, seeking to bypass Moscow from the southeast. The first day of fighting showed that the Germans had learned from the experience of the Battle of Smolensk and changed their tactics. Now they acted more cautiously, avoiding head-on attacks and seeking to encircle the enemy. "The situation is critical," reported the Chief of Front Intelligence on the morning of October 4th. German tank divisions had broken through 60 kilometers into the defenses, cutting off the main communications of the Soviet troops. Communication with the armies was lost, headquarters evacuated in panic, and individual units began to retreat without orders. In such a situation, many commanders would have lost control of the situation. But Yeremenko was not like that. "Comrades," he said to the staff officers, "yes, the enemy has outsmarted us. But this is not the first time in history that a strong enemy has achieved initial success. Our task is to prevent a tactical defeat from turning into a strategic catastrophe." Andrey Ivanovich made a decision that many considered reckless. Instead of attempting to restore a continuous front, he ordered the encircled units to switch to a circular defense and hold key points for as long as possible. At the same time, all the front's reserves were thrown into creating a new line of defense further back. The situation in the Orel area was particularly dramatic. The city was of great strategic importance as a major railway junction, but the forces available to defend it were limited. Yeremenko personally arrived in Orel and organized the defense with all available forces: cadets from the military school, police officers, and workers from defense factories. "Comrades of Orel," he addressed the defenders of the city, "the enemy expects to capture our city on the march. But we will show the fascists what Russian resistance means." These words spread throughout all the defensive positions. People, many of whom had never held a weapon in their hands, prepared to fight to the last. The fighting for Orel lasted 4 days. The Germans, accustomed to quick victories, encountered a completely different type of resistance. Every block, every building had to be taken by force. The Soviet defenders fought with the desperation of the doomed, but it was this desperation that made them particularly dangerous. Yeremenko was at the very center of the fighting. When German tanks broke through to the Regional Executive Committee building, where the city's defense headquarters was located, the Colonel General personally led the counterattack. With a grenade in his hands, he rushed at the enemy vehicle, setting an example for all the defenders. This episode became legendary, although Andrey Ivanovich never liked to remember it. On October 8th, Orel fell. German troops occupied the ruined city, but victory came at a high price. More important was that the heroic defense of Orel won precious time to organize the defense of Tula and the southern approaches to Moscow. Every day, every hour of delay was of strategic importance. But Yeremenko's personal tragedy was not only the loss of the city. During one of the German air raids, his adjutant, Captain Petrov, a young officer who had served with the commander since before the war, was fatally wounded by a shell fragment. Andrey Ivanovich took the death of his subordinates very hard, especially those he knew personally. After the fall of Orel, Yeremenko received an order from Stalin to report to Moscow on the situation on the Bryansk front. The meeting with the Supreme Commander took place in the Kremlin late in the evening on October 10th. Stalin was gloomy. The overall situation was extremely difficult, with the Germans approaching the capital from 3 directions. "Comrade Yeremenko," Stalin said, after carefully studying the map, "you have suffered a defeat. But, according to reports, you fought well. What is the reason for the failure?" Andrey Ivanovich replied with his characteristic directness. "Comrade Stalin, the enemy proved to be stronger than we had anticipated. But the main thing is that we underestimated their ability to maneuver." This answer impressed Stalin. Instead of trying to shift the blame to objective circumstances, Yeremenko honestly admitted his mistakes. "What do you suggest we do next?" asked the supreme leader. "Learn, Comrade Stalin. Learn to fight against such an enemy. And be sure to take revenge." The meeting resulted in a new appointment. Yeremenko was entrusted with the formation and command of a new Fourth Shock Army, which was to take part in the winter counteroffensive near Moscow. This was a sign of trust, but at the same time a test. Would the fiery general be able to correct the mistakes of the October defeat? Analyzing the reasons for the failures, Andrey Ivanovich came to some important conclusions. The main mistake was underestimating the enemy and overestimating his own forces after the success at Yelnya. The war turned out to be much more difficult than it had seemed after the first victories. The Germans were not only a strong but also a very flexible enemy, capable of quickly adapting to changes in the situation. The second lesson concerned the management of troops in modern warfare. The old methods of command, based on rigid schemes and detailed orders, proved ineffective in the highly dynamic conditions of combat operations. New approaches were needed, based on the initiative of subordinates and flexible tactics. But the main thing that Yeremenko understood was that defeat did not mean the end. It was just a lesson, albeit a very painful one. It was important to draw the right conclusions from it and not repeat the mistakes in the future. The war was just beginning, and there were still many battles ahead in which he could prove his worth as a commander. Was he ready to apply the knowledge he had gained in the new conditions when the Red Army was preparing for the first major counteroffensive of the war? The formation of the Fourth Shock Army took place under extremely difficult conditions. November 1941 was a critical month for the defense of Moscow. German troops were 30 kilometers from the capital, and fighting was taking place in the Moscow metro. In such a situation, it was extremely difficult to create a new unit, but Yeremenko coped with the task, using all his experience and energy. The new army was based on the remnants of units that had been withdrawn from the encirclement after the October defeat, fresh Siberian divisions and reserve regiments of the Moscow militia. The heterogeneity of the composition created serious problems. Experienced frontline soldiers, green recruits, and volunteer militiamen did not interact well with each other. It was necessary to create a combat-ready military unit from this hodgepodge as quickly as possible. Yeremenko began by personally meeting with the commanders of all regiments and battalions. "Comrades, commanders," he said at the first meeting, "we do not have time for lengthy preparations. In a month, we must go on the offensive and deal the Germans a blow they will remember for a long time. Each of you is responsible for the combat readiness of your units." The commander paid particular attention to the morale of the troops. Many soldiers had gone through the bitterness of retreat and encirclement and lost faith in the possibility of victory over a seemingly invincible enemy. It was necessary not only to restore their fighting spirit, but also to instill confidence in the success of the upcoming operations. Andrey Ivanovich used every opportunity to communicate with the soldiers. He regularly visited units, talked to the soldiers, and explained the general situation at the front. "The Germans seem strong," he told the Red Army soldiers, "but they have a weak spot. They are not adapted to the Russian winter. And we are at home. This is our advantage, and we will use it." Preparations for the offensive were carried out in the strictest secrecy. Stalin personally emphasized the importance of the surprise element of the upcoming counterattack. The Germans were not to suspect the concentration of large forces for an offensive operation. Troops advanced to the front line only at night, carefully camouflaging themselves from enemy aerial reconnaissance. Yeremenko proved himself to be a master of camouflage and disinformation. On his orders, false positions were created in the Army's zone of operations, troop movements in other directions were simulated, and rumors were spread about the preparation of defensive lines. At the same time, the real strike groups were concentrated with maximum secrecy. Artillery played a special role in the commander's plans. The experience of the Battle of Smolensk showed the decisive importance of firepower for the success of an offensive operation. An unprecedented concentration of guns and mortars was created in the 4th Shock Army's sector, more than 200 barrels per kilometer of the front. Artillery is our main advantage, Yeremenko explained to the commanders of the artillery regiments. The Germans have more tanks and better aircraft, but we can create numerical superiority in artillery. And this superiority must be the decisive factor for success. Preparations for the operation proceeded in parallel with general preparations for a counteroffensive near Moscow. Yeremenko regularly participated in meetings at headquarters where the details of the upcoming strike were discussed. The plan was to launch simultaneous strikes in several directions so that the enemy would be unable to transfer reserves from one section to another. The commander insisted on the most decisive action from the very beginning of the operation. "We will have one chance," he told his colleagues. "The element of surprise will quickly disappear. Therefore, in the first few days, we must advance as far as possible, inflict maximum damage on the enemy, and seize the strategic initiative." On December 1st, Anastas Ivanovich Mikoyan, a member of the State Defense Committee, visited the Army's location. The distinguished guest personally assessed the troops' readiness for the upcoming offensive. Yeremenko showed him all the key areas, including artillery positions, ammunition depots, and medical stations. "Your troops make a good impression, Comrade Yeremenko," Mikoyan said after the inspection. "You can feel the firm hand of the commander. But are they ready for such a complex operation?" Andrey Ivanovich replied with his characteristic confidence. "Comrade Mikoyan, my army is ready to carry out any task." This confidence was based not only on the commander's natural optimism. During months of preparation, he had managed to create a truly combat-ready unit. Officers and soldiers were imbued with the spirit of the upcoming offensive and believed in the possibility of victory. Most importantly, he had managed to establish clear coordination between the various branches of the military. On December 3rd, Yeremenko received the final order from headquarters to begin the operation. The counteroffensive was to begin on December 6th along the entire Western Front. The 4th Shock Army was assigned a key role to break through the German defenses in the Kalinin direction and advance on Klin. On the night before the offensive, the commander visited all units of the army. He met with soldiers, checked the readiness of equipment, and encouraged commanders. "Comrades," he said to the soldiers, "tomorrow we begin what the whole country has been waiting for. We are going on the offensive. Let's show the fascists what the Russian bayonet means." The mood of the troops was high. After months of retreat and defensive battles, the soldiers were eager for revenge. They believed in their commander, who had already proven that he knew how to win. The question was whether Yeremenko would confirm this reputation in a winter offensive against a still powerful enemy. Would the fiery general be able to learn from the lessons of defeat and turn them into the basis for victory? On December 6, 1941, at 5 o'clock in the morning, artillery preparation began across the entire front near Moscow. Yeremenko's 4th Shock Army struck in the Kalinin direction, seeking to break through the defenses of the Wehrmacht's 23rd Army Corps. The commander personally observed the barrage from an advanced observation post just 1 kilometer from the front line. It was a spectacular sight. Hundreds of guns simultaneously opened fire on German positions. The winter morning was lit up by thousands of flashes, and the roar of the cannonade could be heard for tens of kilometers. "Well done, comrades artillerymen," said Yeremenko, observing the results of the firing. "This is exactly how we should welcome uninvited guests." The staff officers smiled. The commander was in his element. The Germans were taken by surprise, not only by the fact of the offensive, but also by its scale. German intelligence had completely overlooked the concentration of large Red Army forces. The command of Army Group Center expected that the Soviet troops were completely demoralized by previous defeats and incapable of active action. After 2 hours of artillery preparation, the infantry went on the attack. Yeremenko decided to personally lead the offensive of the main strike group. "General, this is extremely risky," warned the Army Chief of Staff. "At such a moment, the commander must be at the front," replied Andrey Ivanovich, checking his machine gun. The initial results exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. By noon, the German defenses had been broken through to a depth of 8 kilometers. The enemy, accustomed to superiority in weapons and organization, was confronted for the first time with a situation in which Soviet troops had numerical and firepower superiority in the direction of the main strike. The actions of the ski battalions, specially trained for winter conditions, proved particularly effective. These units bypassed German strongpoints in deep snow, got behind enemy lines, and attacked from unexpected directions. German soldiers, who did not have the appropriate winter equipment, were unable to effectively counter such actions. By the evening of the first day of the offensive, Yeremenko's army had advanced 15 kilometers, capturing several important settlements. Losses were significantly lower than expected, thanks to the surprise of the attack and thorough artillery preparation. Most importantly, they managed to break through the enemy's tactical defense zone and enter operational space. Stalin personally congratulated Yeremenko on the success of the first day. "Comrade Yeremenko, your troops are setting an example for the entire front. Keep up the good work." This support from the top leadership was especially important after the October defeat. Andrey Ivanovich proved that he was capable not only of enduring failure, but also of achieving victory. Building on this success, the commander decided to introduce a mobile group, a tank brigade, and a motorized regiment into the breach. These units were to advance rapidly into the depths of the German defenses, disrupting enemy communications and preventing them from organizing a new line of resistance. On December 8th, an episode occurred that became a textbook example of Yeremenko's command skills. The German command attempted to stop the Soviet offensive with a counterattack by large tank forces. 2 Panzer Grenadier divisions struck the flank of the advancing group, creating a critical situation. Panic broke out at Army headquarters. Officers suggested halting the offensive and transferring reserves to repel the counterattack. Yeremenko made a different decision. "The best defense is offense," he said. "We will attack even more decisively. Let the Germans think about defending their rear, not about counterattacks." His calculation proved correct. The increased pace of the offensive forced the German command to abandon the counterattack and transfer reserves to reinforce their crumbling defenses. The initiative finally passed to the Soviet troops. By December 10th, Yeremenko's army had advanced 40 kilometers, liberating the city of Klin. The liberation of Klin was not only of tactical importance, but also of enormous moral significance. It was the first major city to be recaptured from the enemy during the winter counteroffensive. Local residents welcomed the Red Army soldiers as liberators, told them about the atrocities committed by the occupiers, and thanked them for freeing them from German rule. Yeremenko personally participated in the ceremony to liberate the city. "Comrades of Klin," he said to the gathered residents, "the dark period in the history of your city is over. The Red Army has returned to stay. Now we will advance until we achieve complete victory over fascism." These words were met with thunderous applause. The success at Klin opened up new prospects for the army. The front command set the task of advancing in the direction of Volokholamsk, creating the threat of encircling the entire Moscow group of the enemy. For Yeremenko, this meant an opportunity to avenge the October defeat. But the Germans were not going to give up without a fight. Hitler categorically forbade retreat, ordering every settlement to be held to the last soldier. This meant that even more fierce battles awaited the Soviet troops ahead, where not only military skill but also the morale of the fighters would play a decisive role. On December 13th, Yeremenko's army approached the heavily fortified enemy line. The Germans had taken up advantageous positions on the heights, creating an echelon defense system. Storming such positions required special skill and, most importantly, readiness for heavy losses. "Comrades," the commander addressed the soldiers before the decisive battle, "a difficult line lies ahead. The enemy will resist desperately. But remember, every step forward brings us closer to Berlin. For the motherland, for Stalin, forward." And the army went on the attack, led by its fiery commander. Would this momentum break the enemy's organized resistance and turn tactical success into strategic victory? The transition from defense to offense became the moment of truth for Yeremenko's commanding talent. January 1942 was marked by the success of the winter campaign, and the 4th Shock Army played a key role in this process. The commander had to prove that the December victories were not a coincidence, but the result of a correct understanding of the principles of modern warfare. As he advanced west of Moscow, Yeremenko faced new challenges. The German command, having recovered from the initial shock, began organized resistance. The enemy skillfully used populated areas as defensive strongholds, turning each village into a small fortress. Breaking through such positions required not only courage, but also tactical skill. Particularly fierce fighting unfolded for the town of Sikevka. This small regional center was of great strategic importance as a road junction controlling enemy communications. The Germans turned the town into a powerful fortified area, brought in reserves, and prepared for a long siege. Yeremenko made a decision that many considered risky. Instead of a frontal assault on the fortifications, he organized a double flanking maneuver. 2 divisions were to attack the city from the flanks, while the main forces would pin down the enemy with frontal actions. "The Germans are expecting a frontal attack," he explained the plan to his commanders. Let's give them something they don't expect. The operation began on the night of January 15th. Ski battalions secretly bypassed German positions and by dawn had taken up their starting positions for the attack. At the same time, artillery began intensive shelling of the city center, distracting the enemy's attention from the flanks. The plan worked perfectly. By noon, Sikevka was liberated. This success opened the way to Rzhev, one of the key nodes of the German defense. But it was here that Yeremenko first encountered the limits of his capabilities. The Rzhev salient was a powerful system of fortifications that the Germans had been building for months. Storming such a position required significantly more forces than the army had at its disposal. Front Commander General Zhukov set Yeremenko a difficult task: to hold the lines that had been achieved and prepare for a new offensive. This meant a transition to positional warfare, a type of combat that did not suit the temperament of the fiery general. But Andrey Ivanovich understood the need to consolidate his successes. February and March 1942 were marked by intense local battles. The Germans constantly launched counterattacks in an attempt to regain their lost positions. Yeremenko proved himself a master of defensive operations, skillfully maneuvering his reserves and repelling all attempts by the enemy to break through the Soviet defenses. Particularly heavy fighting took place in the area of the village of Pogorelye Gorodishche. Here, German troops concentrated a large tank group and attacked the positions of one of the army divisions for a week. The situation became critical when the Germans broke through the first line of defense and threatened to outflank the entire group. Yeremenko personally arrived at the battle zone and organized a counterattack using all available reserves. "Comrades," he said to the soldiers of the combined battalion, "the enemy thinks it has won. Let's show him what a Russian counterattack means." The attack was successful. The Germans were pushed back to their starting positions with heavy losses. In April, Yeremenko's army received reinforcements and new equipment. The High Command was preparing a major spring-summer offensive, and experienced units were to play a leading role in it. For the commander, this meant an opportunity to return to his favorite type of combat operations: offensive operations. Preparations for the new offensive took into account the experience of the winter campaign. Yeremenko demanded that his subordinates thoroughly work out the coordination between different branches of the military. Particular attention was paid to coordinating the actions of the infantry, artillery, and aviation. "Modern warfare is like an orchestra," he told his officers, "and every instrument must sound at the right time." The May operation in the Rzhev area was the culmination of Yeremenko's activities on the Western Front. The 4th Shock Army was supposed to break through the German defenses and advance towards Smolensk. It was an attempt to avenge the defeats of the first months of the war. The operation began on May 12th with a powerful artillery barrage. But this time, the Germans were ready for the Soviet offensive. They had created a deeply echeloned defense, prepared strong reserves, and met the attackers with organized resistance. The first few days showed that there would be no easy victory. The fighting became extremely fierce. Each settlement changed hands several times. The losses on both sides were enormous, but neither side could achieve a decisive victory. For the first time, Yeremenko faced a situation where energy and determination were not enough to overcome the enemy's organized resistance. By the end of May, it became clear that the operation had not achieved its objectives. Soviet troops had advanced only 10 to 15 kilometers, suffering heavy losses in the process. The High Command decided to halt the offensive and switch to defense at the lines that had been reached. For Yeremenko, it was a painful lesson. He realized that the war had changed, that the enemy had become more cautious and skilled. The methods that had brought success in the winter proved insufficient in the new conditions. More complex tactical decisions, better training of troops, and improvement of the supply system were required. In June 1942, Yeremenko received a new assignment. The headquarters sent him to the Stalingrad direction, where events were unfolding that would determine the further course of the war. This was a sign of trust, but at the same time, a new test. Saying goodbye to the officers of the 4th Shock Army, Andrey Ivanovich said, "Comrades, we have come a difficult path together from defeat to victory. New trials await us ahead, but I am confident that we will withstand them." These words proved prophetic. The Western Front gave Yeremenko invaluable experience in commanding large units in various types of combat operations. He learned not only to attack, but also to defend, not only to win, but also to learn from failures. This experience would be useful to him in the upcoming battles at Stalingrad. Would the fiery general be able to apply his accumulated knowledge in completely new conditions when the fate of the entire Stalingrad front was at stake? July 1942 found Colonel General Yeremenko in his new position as commander of the Stalingrad front. The appointment came at a critical moment, when General Friedrich Paulus's 6th Army was rapidly advancing towards the Volga, threatening to capture the country's most important industrial center. The High Command demanded that the German offensive be stopped at all costs, and that the city bearing the leader's name not be allowed to fall. The situation on the Stalingrad front resembled the early days of the war. German troops had overwhelming superiority in aircraft and tanks, and their advance seemed unstoppable. Soviet units were retreating, suffering heavy losses, and the morale of the troops was undermined by continuous failures. In such a situation, a commander was needed who was capable of turning the tide of events with the strength of his character. Yeremenko arrived in Stalingrad on July 20th and immediately began to study the situation. The first thing that struck him was the state of the frontline troops. Many units were semi-encircled, communication between formations was disrupted, and supplies were intermittent. "Comrades," he said to the staff officers, "the situation is serious, but not hopeless. We have one major advantage. We are defending our land." The new commander began by bringing order to the troop command system. He personally visited all the divisions on the front, met with commanders, and assessed the real state of the units. Many officers spoke frankly about the impossibility of stopping the enemy with the forces at their disposal. Yeremenko listened to all opinions, but made decisions on his own. "We will fight for every house, for every street," he announced at a meeting of the command staff. "The Germans are used to quick victories, but in Stalingrad, they will learn a lesson they will remember forever." These words became the motto of the city's defenders. Preparations began for the defense that was supposed to stop the seemingly invincible German army. Yeremenko paid special attention to strengthening the morale of the troops. He understood that in urban combat, the enemy's technical superiority would not be so noticeable, and that the main role would be played by the fortitude and courage of individual fighters. The commander regularly visited the front lines, talked to the soldiers, and explained the importance of the upcoming battles. On August 23rd, German troops reached the Volga River north of Stalingrad. cutting off the city's communications with the main areas of the country. The situation became critical. Stalingrad was half surrounded. At the front headquarters, many officers suggested evacuating the troops to the eastern bank of the Volga while it was still possible. Yeremenko categorically rejected such proposals. "There is no land for us beyond the Volga," he said, paraphrasing the famous words of Commissar Alexander Ilyich Rodimtsev. "We will hold out in Stalingrad until the very last moment." This decision required enormous courage, as it meant a willingness to fight in conditions that were obviously unfavorable. The start of street fighting in Stalingrad proved the commander's calculations to be correct. In urban conditions, the German troops lost many of their advantages. The Air Force could not effectively support the infantry due to the proximity of the opposing sides. Tanks became easy prey for anti-tank weapons hidden in the ruins of buildings. Yeremenko personally supervised the organization of the defense of key city facilities. He attached particular importance to holding the central part of Stalingrad, where the most important industrial enterprises were located. "Every factory is a fortress," he told his commanders. "Every workshop is a stronghold of defense." The September battles in Stalingrad were fiercer than ever. The enemies fought for every building, every floor. The front line often ran along different sides of the same street. In such conditions, the personal bravery of the commanders and their ability to maintain the morale of their subordinates played a special role. The front commander set an example for all the defenders of the city. He regularly appeared in the most dangerous areas and personally directed the repulsion of critical enemy attacks. When the Germans broke through to the Red October factory, Yeremenko personally led the counterattack of a combined detachment of workers and soldiers. The October battles were the climax of the Battle of Stalingrad. The Germans made a last-ditch attempt to take the city by storm, throwing all their reserves into the fight. For several days, the outcome of the battle hung in the balance. It seemed that one more effort by the enemy would bring down the city's defenses. During these critical days, Yeremenko's character as a military leader was fully revealed. He did not lose his presence of mind even in the most difficult moments, continuing to plan further actions and prepare counterattacks. "Comrades," he said to the soldiers, "the enemy is running out of steam. A little more, and we will go on the offensive." November brought the long-awaited turning point. Soviet troops launched a counteroffensive, surrounding Paulus's 6th Army. Operation Uranus was a complete success, but for Yeremenko, this was only the beginning. Now it was time to eliminate the encircled enemy group and develop the offensive in other directions. The winter campaign of 1942-1943 was a triumph for the Soviet Army. The troops of the Stalingrad front not only defeated the encircled enemy, but also began to pursue the retreating German armies. Yeremenko had his first opportunity to command large-scale offensive operations. The front's actions in the Don River Basin were particularly successful. Here, Soviet troops broke through enemy defenses and rapidly advanced westward, liberating occupied territories. Yeremenko personally led this offensive, demonstrating his mastery of commanding mobile units in conditions of maneuver warfare. By the spring of 1943, the front's troops had reached the Seversky Donets, advancing 300 kilometers from Stalingrad. This was a tremendous success that completely rehabilitated Yeremenko after the failures of the first period of the war. The victory at Stalingrad proved that the fiery general was capable not only of tactical successes, but also of strategic achievements. But new challenges lay ahead, the main one being the assault on the last stronghold of the Reich, East Prussia. January 1945 found Marshal Yeremenko. He received this rank after the victory at Stalingrad in a completely new theater of war. The High Command appointed him commander of the Second Belarusian Front, which faced a monumental task: the assault on East Prussia, the historical heart of German militarism and the Wehrmacht's last major stronghold on Reich territory. East Prussia was a natural fortress, fortified by the Germans over centuries. A dense network of lakes, forests, and swamps created ideal conditions for defense. In addition, the enemy had turned every city into a fortified area, and Königsberg itself was surrounded by several belts of modern fortifications. With significant forces at his disposal, 12 armies and 4 tank corps, Yeremenko understood the scale of the task ahead. This was not just a military operation, but a symbolic battle designed to break the last remnants of Nazi Germany's resistance. The prestige of the Soviet Union and Stalin personally depended on the success of the offensive. Planning the operation took several weeks. Andrey Ivanovich personally studied each section of the upcoming offensive, met with army commanders, and analyzed intelligence data. He paid particular attention to studying the German fortification system. The enemy has turned East Prussia into a giant fortress, he told his staff officers. But every fortress has its weak points. The main problem was the need to coordinate actions with neighboring fronts. The East Prussian operation was planned as part of the Red Army's General Winter Offensive, and Yeremenko's success directly depended on the actions of the troops of Marshals Konstantin Rokossovsky and Ivan Chernyakhovsky. The commander paid particular attention to the preparation of assault groups. The experience of urban combat in Stalingrad showed the decisive role of specially trained units capable of operating in densely built-up areas and strong fortifications. Separate assault battalions armed with flamethrowers, explosives, and assault ladders were created in each army. On January 13, 1945, the East Prussian operation began. The artillery preparation lasted 4 hours and surpassed in power anything that had been used before on the Soviet-German front. More than 3,000 guns and mortars simultaneously rained fire on German positions. Yeremenko personally observed the start of the operation from the forward command post. "Comrades artillerymen," he said, seeing the results of the fire raid, "you are opening the way to victory. Now it's up to the infantry." And indeed, when the rifle divisions went on the attack, German resistance proved to be much weaker than expected. The first days of the offensive brought encouraging results. Soviet troops broke through the enemy's first line of defense and advanced up to 20 kilometers. The tank corps were particularly successful, rapidly developing the breakthrough and not giving the Germans a chance to gain a foothold at intermediate lines. But the main difficulties lay ahead. The German command, having recovered from the initial shock, began organized resistance. Every city turned into a field of fierce battle. The enemy defended itself particularly stubbornly in Tilsit, Insterburg, and other large settlements. On January 20th, an episode occurred that became characteristic of the entire East Prussian campaign. During the assault on the city of Gumbinnen, one of the Soviet divisions was surrounded. The Germans counterattacked with large forces, seeking to restore the situation. The situation became critical when it became clear that the surrounded units were running out of ammunition. Yeremenko decided to personally lead the operation to break the encirclement of the surrounded division. "We don't abandon our own," he declared, and at the head of a tank brigade, he broke through to his besieged comrades. The operation was a complete success. The division was freed, and the German units suffered heavy losses. This episode made a huge impression on the frontline troops. The soldiers were convinced that their commander was willing to risk his own life to save his subordinates. The morale of the troops rose significantly, which affected the pace of the offensive. By the end of January, Soviet troops had reached the outer defensive perimeter of Königsberg. Preparing to storm the main fortress of East Prussia required careful planning. Königsberg was surrounded by 3 belts of fortifications, including concrete pillboxes, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. The city's garrison numbered more than 100,000 men, under the command of the experienced General Otto von Lasch. Yeremenko studied the city plans obtained from intelligence, consulted with fortification specialists, and developed tactics for storming each individual fortification. "Königsberg is a symbol of Prussian militarism," he told his officers. "Its fall will be a symbol of our victory over fascism." The commander paid particular attention to coordinating the actions of various branches of the military. Storming such a powerful fortress required flawless coordination between the infantry, artillery, aviation, and engineering units. Each section of the enemy's defenses was studied separately, and special tactical techniques were developed to overcome it. The battles in February showed that the assault on Königsberg would be an extremely difficult undertaking. The Germans put up desperate resistance, understanding the symbolic significance of the fortress. Each fort had to be taken by force, resulting in significant losses. The pace of the offensive slowed, and it became clear that a radically new approach to the task was needed. In March, Yeremenko received reinforcements, 2 Guards armies, and additional air support. This made it possible to change the tactics of the assault and move on to the methodical suppression of individual pockets of resistance. But the main test was still ahead, the final assault on the citadel, which was to put an end to the centuries-old history of Prussian militarism. Was the fiery Marshal ready for the decisive move that would make his name immortal in military history? April 1945 was the month when the fate of the Third Reich's last major stronghold on the Eastern Front was decided. Königsberg, the ancient capital of East Prussia, the city of Kant and the Prussian kings, had become a symbol of German resistance. Its fall was to be not just a military victory, but a moral blow to the remnants of Nazi ideology. Marshal Yeremenko understood the historical significance of the upcoming assault. Königsberg was defended not only by the concrete and steel of modern fortifications, but also by the centuries-old traditions of the Prussian military school. The commandant of the fortress, General Otto von Lasch, was an experienced military leader who vowed to hold the city to the last soldier. Preparations for the decisive assault were carried out with exceptional care. Yeremenko personally studied every fort and every enemy fortification. Intelligence obtained detailed plans of the defensive structures built by the Germans over decades. The underground communications linking the various defense nodes presented a particular challenge. "Comrades," the commander addressed the participants of the front's military council, "we are facing a task unlike any other in the entire war. Königsberg is not just a fortress, it is the embodiment of Prussian militarism. Our victory here will become a symbol of the triumph of justice over aggression." A special group was formed from the best units of the front for the assault. It included Guards rifle divisions, tank brigades, breakthrough artillery regiments, and assault aviation squadrons. Each unit was given a specific task and worked out in detail how to accomplish it. Yeremenko paid particular attention to artillery preparation. To destroy the powerful fortifications, special heavy artillery was brought in, including the famous 203mm Katyusha howitzers. The density of artillery reached a record high of 300 barrels per kilometer of front line. On April 6th, the final operation to capture Königsberg began. The artillery preparation continued for 5 hours without interruption. The roar of thousands of guns could be heard from a distance of 100 kilometers. The ancient walls of the fortress shook under the blows of Soviet artillery, but it was not possible to completely destroy the powerful fortifications. After the barrage ended, assault groups went on the attack. Yeremenko personally observed the course of the battle from a command post located just 2 kilometers from the front line. "The decisive moment is beginning," he told the staff officers. "Today, we will find out which is stronger, German fortifications or Russian courage." The first hours of the assault showed how tough the task was. The German garrisons in the forts put up desperate resistance. Each casemate had to be taken in hand-to-hand combat. The losses of the attacking units grew, but the commanders continued to lead their soldiers forward, inspired by the Marshals' personal example. Particularly, fierce fighting broke out over Fort No. 5, the key node of the entire defense system. This fort controlled the approaches to the city center and had been turned by the Germans into a veritable underground fortress. For 3 days, assault groups unsuccessfully attacked the fortification, suffering heavy losses. Yeremenko decided to personally lead the assault on the fort. When soldiers see their commander beside them, they are capable of the impossible, he explained his decision to his adjutant. With a machine gun in his hands, the marshal went on the attack together with the guardsmen, setting an example for the entire assault group. The attack was successful. Fort No. 5 fell, and its garrison laid down its arms. This success opened the way to the city center and demoralized the remaining garrisons. By the evening of April 9th, Soviet troops had captured most of the outer defensive perimeter of Königsberg. That night, the city's commandant, General von Lasch, requested surrender negotiations. The meeting took place at Yeremenko's headquarters on the morning of April 10th. The German general looked dejected. He understood that resistance was now pointless, as the fortress garrison had been virtually destroyed. "Herr General," Yeremenko addressed the commandant through an interpreter, "you have bravely defended your city, but the war is over. Further resistance will only lead to unnecessary casualties among the civilian population." Von Lasch nodded silently and signed the act of surrender of the Königsberg garrison. The fall of the ancient Prussian capital was a sensation not only in the USSR, but throughout the world. The fortress, which was considered impregnable, fell in just 4 days of assault. It was a brilliant demonstration of the power of the Red Army and the military skills of its commanders. Stalin personally congratulated Yeremenko on the victory. "Comrade Marshal, you have accomplished a feat worthy of admiration. The capture of Königsberg will go down in history as a model of military art." Andrey Ivanovich was awarded the Order of Victory, the highest military award of the USSR. But for Yeremenko himself, the moral aspect of the victory was more important than the awards. Königsberg symbolized Prussian militarism, which had threatened peace in Europe for centuries. Its fall meant the final collapse of the military machine that had been spawned by this land. After the city's surrender, the Marshal personally participated in the ceremony of raising the red banner over the tower of Königsberg Castle. "Comrades," he addressed the assembled troops, "today we have closed a dark page in European history. Never again will this land pose a threat to peaceful nations." The capture of Königsberg was Yeremenko's last major operation in the Great Patriotic War. A month later, Germany's surrender was signed, and the long-standing bloody carnage finally came to an end. For the fiery Marshal, this was the pinnacle of his military career. He had risen from division commander to conqueror of the enemy's last stronghold. What would the years of peace bring to the Marshal? And how would the fate of a man whose life was inextricably linked to war unfold? On May 9, 1945, Marshal Yeremenko was in Königsberg, the city that had become a symbol of his personal victory over German militarism. When the salutes announcing Germany's surrender sounded, Andrey Ivanovich stood on the ruins of the ancient castle of the Teutonic Knights and thought about the price of this long-awaited victory. 4 years of war had claimed millions of lives. Yeremenko, like no one else, knew this terrible arithmetic of death. Every operation under his command cost thousands of soldiers' lives. Every decision made by the commander could save or destroy entire regiments and divisions. The burden of responsibility for people's fates was a severe test for a man of his temperament. "Comrades, officers," he addressed the front headquarters on Victory Day, "we have fulfilled our duty to the motherland. Fascism has been defeated. The aggressor has been defeated. But victory has come at a high price. We will never forget those who did not live to see this day." The Marshal's voice sounded not only triumphant, but also mournful for his fallen comrades. Yeremenko's personal losses in the war were enormous. Many friends from his youth, comrades in arms from the Civil War, and fellow soldiers had perished. His younger brother Nikolai, who fell near Moscow in 1941, did not return home. These losses left a permanent wound in the heart of the fiery Marshal. But the main outcome of the war for Yeremenko was an understanding of the true price of military art. Beautiful schemes on maps were turned into reality through the blood and suffering of ordinary soldiers. Every tactical decision had a human dimension, and this placed a special responsibility on the commander. The post-war months brought new challenges. The country lay in ruins, and it was necessary to rebuild the destroyed economy, demobilize a multi-million-strong army, and return people who had known only war to peaceful life. Yeremenko was appointed commander of the Baltic Military District, one of the key regions on the western border of the USSR. Peaceful service proved to be no less difficult than military campaigns. Now it was necessary not to defeat the enemy, but to build a new life. With his characteristic energy, the Marshal set about solving a multitude of problems: the resettlement of demobilized soldiers, the restoration of military infrastructure, and the establishment of relations with the local population. In the Baltic states, Yeremenko faced the consequences of the Forest Brothers, anti-Soviet resistance that continued for several years after the end of the war. It was necessary to find a balance between the harshness required to maintain order and an understanding of local characteristics. "War taught us how to defeat the enemy," the Marshal told the district officers, "but peace requires the ability to live with people of different views and beliefs. Our task is not to suppress, but to persuade." This approach bore fruit. By the early 1950s, the situation in the Baltic states had stabilized significantly. The 1950s became a period of rethinking military experience. Yeremenko actively participated in the work of studying and summarizing the lessons of the Great Patriotic War. He wrote several books in which he analyzed the tactics and strategy of various operations and shared his experience of commanding large units. His memoirs, Stalingrad and Remember the War, were especially valuable, in which the Marshal spoke with his characteristic candor about the difficulties of wartime. He did not hide mistakes and failures, honestly analyzing the reasons for defeats and victories. These books became classics of military memoir literature. In 1960, Yeremenko was appointed Deputy Minister of Defense of the USSR. In this position, he dealt with issues of combat training of troops, the development of new regulations, and the improvement of military education. His experience as a frontline commander was especially valuable in the context of the technical rearmament of the army. The Cold War required Soviet military leaders to think in new ways. Nuclear weapons changed the nature of possible conflicts, and fundamentally, new types of weapons appeared. Despite his age, Yeremenko strove to keep up with the times, studied modern technologies, and analyzed the experience of local conflicts. The war of the future will be completely different, he told young officers, but the principles of military art remain unchanged. The winner will be the one who is better prepared, who is able to make quick decisions in difficult situations, who is ready to take responsibility. The Marshal's personal life was not easy. War and many years of service left him with virtually no time for his family. His wife, Zinaida Grigorievna, waited many years for her husband to return from distant missions, raised their children, and endured the hardships of military life. It was only in peacetime that Yeremenko was able to fully appreciate her sacrifice and devotion. The Marshal's children chose different paths in life. His eldest son became a military man, continuing the family tradition. His daughter chose medicine, devoting herself to serving people. It was important to Yeremenko that his children grew up to be decent people, capable of contributing to society. In his last years of service, the Marshal thought a lot about the meaning of his life. The war brought him fame and recognition, but took away his youth and health. Many of his comrades remained on the battlefields, but he outlived them all and carried their memory with him until the end of his days. After retiring in 1970, Yeremenko did not lose interest in military issues. He advised the creators of military history films, met with veterans, and participated in commemorative events. Until his last days, he remained a symbol of the victorious generation. What legacy did this man leave to future generations, and what is the enduring value of his life experience? On November 19, 1970, Marshal of the Soviet Union, Andrey Ivanovich Yeremenko, died in Moscow, taking with him into eternity the memory of the great era of which he was both a witness and a creator. His death marked the end of an entire page in the history of Russian military art, the last of a constellation of commanders whose names are forever linked to victory in the Great Patriotic War had passed away. The Marshal's funeral became a national event. Thousands of people came to say goodbye to the man who embodied the courage and fortitude of the Soviet people during the most difficult years of history. Among those who accompanied him were his comrades in arms, war veterans, representatives of all branches of the military, and ordinary citizens for whom Yeremenko was a living symbol of victory. The life of the fiery marshal became the embodiment of the fate of an entire generation. The son of a peasant, who in the years of revolutionary upheaval chose the path of serving his country, he went through all the trials of the 20th century. World War I, the Revolution, the Civil War, the years of peaceful construction, the Great Patriotic War. Each stage demanded new qualities and abilities from him. The main feature of Yeremenko's character was his ability to preserve his humanity in the inhuman conditions of war. For all his determination and toughness, he never lost his sympathy for the ordinary soldier. Officers and generals may have feared his wrath, but ordinary soldiers always saw the marshal as a protector and father figure. Yeremenko's military legacy is multifaceted. He was one of the few Soviet commanders who successfully commanded troops in all types of combat operations, from defense to offense, from maneuver operations to assaults on fortified positions. His tactical innovations were studied in military academies, and his command style became a model for many generations of officers. Yeremenko's experience in managing troops in critical situations is particularly valuable. His ability to make quick decisions in uncertain conditions, his willingness to take responsibility in difficult circumstances, and his ability to maintain the morale of his subordinates in the most difficult moments. All these qualities remain relevant for military leaders of any era. Equally important is the marshal's human side. In an era when military leaders often became hostages to political ambitions, Yeremenko managed to remain faithful to his professional duty. For him, serving his country always took precedence over personal interests, and the fate of a simple soldier was more important than career considerations. Yeremenko's literary legacy also deserves special attention. His memoirs are distinguished by a rare honesty and self-criticism for military literature. The marshal did not try to embellish his actions or hide his mistakes. On the contrary, he sought to convey to readers the lessons learned from the bitter experience of war. His reflections on the price of victory are particularly valuable. Yeremenko was one of the few Soviet military leaders who spoke openly about the human losses of war and the moral responsibility of a commander for the lives of his subordinates. This theme runs through all his works. Yeremenko's influence on the development of Soviet military art is difficult to overestimate. Many of his students and followers became major military leaders who applied the principles they had learned under the guidance of the fiery marshal. His school of command was distinguished by its special attention to the human factor in war. International recognition of Yeremenko's achievements came in the post-war years. Western military historians highly valued his contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany. His actions in the Battle of Stalingrad and the storming of Königsberg were particularly noted as examples of modern military art. The memory of the marshal is preserved not only in official monuments and museums. Streets in dozens of cities, military schools, and ships bear his name. But the main monument to Yeremenko remains victory itself, to which he contributed his talent and will. For modern generations, Yeremenko is interesting primarily as an example of a person who managed to find his place in history. He was not a politician or a diplomat. His element was war. But it was in this terrible element that he managed to demonstrate the best human qualities: courage, honesty, and loyalty to duty. The fiery temperament that many considered to be Yeremenko's flaw actually became his greatest strength. In an era that demanded decisive action, it was people like him who became the makers of history. His emotionality was not a weakness. It was a manifestation of his deep devotion to the cause he served. By studying the life and work of Marshal Yeremenko, we gain a better understanding of the nature of the Soviet people's feat in the Great Patriotic War. Victory was forged not only on the battlefields, but also in the characters of people who were ready to sacrifice everything for the future of their country. The legacy of the fiery Marshal reminds us that at critical moments in history, the fate of nations depends on the willingness of individuals to take responsibility and act despite the dangers and difficulties. This willingness to serve remains relevant at all times. The name of Andrey Ivanovich Yeremenko is forever inscribed in history as a symbol of courage, professionalism, and selfless devotion to the motherland. His life became an example of how an individual's qualities can influence the course of world history when they are directed toward serving great goals.